morning, Cornerstone Church. My name is Nicki Garman, and I'm excited to share with you something that the Lord has been teaching me these last couple months during quarantine. So if any of you have been worshiping with us on the weekends via our live stream service, at the very beginning of quarantine, we heard a great sermon by an elder in our church, John Covey. It was the first live stream service actually that we participated in. Quarantine was about to begin and John was teaching on the Sabbath. There were a lot of Hebrew words that John defined relating to this idea of God's Sabbath. And so I have sort of taken some of those definitions and smushed them all together with the purpose of kind of giving us a working definition of Sabbath. So for our purposes, when I'm talking about God's Sabbath, I'm defining it as an invitation to settle into God's completely satisfying rest. So, armed with that definition and that idea of Sabbath as an invitation to settle into God's completely satisfying rest, I actually looked at quarantine with anticipation and excitement that perhaps this time of nothing on our schedules, my whole family home gathered eating together, no job to have to report to, not having to get up to an alarm, would be a sort of Sabbath rest. It would be refreshing. However, I have some really deeply ingrained patterns of behavior by which I try to produce peace and joy and satisfaction on my own apart from the Lord. I love the approval of man. I love for people to like me and like my family and like my ideas and the things that I say and bake and do, and that satisfaction that comes from that really does sort of fill me with a sense of peace and joy. But of course, that peace and joy is fleeting at best. If someone treats me with indifference or says something negative to me, I plunge into this pit of despair, right? It's a fleeting satisfaction at best. The other difficulty with desperately wanting to get peace and joy and satisfaction through the approval of man during quarantine is that we were encouraged to be socially distant from other people. So the people I was looking to for encouragement and praise were my own family members. And as much as I love the people in my family, I have 3 teenagers. And they don't speak the language of praise and compliments. They're not waking up in the morning thinking, how can I encourage my mom and really let her know that I cherish her? Never fear, I have another dysfunctional method by which I go looking for peace and joy and satisfaction, and that is through accomplishments. So while we were cooped up in our house in quarantine, I just started making these really long lists of things to do. There's plenty to do in our house. If any of you have ever been to our house, it's old and it needs a lot of attention. There was, at the end of each day, a sense of satisfaction and pride that I had accomplished something, and that, that window I painted looked good. But that satisfaction too was fleeting. So at about this time during quarantine, I was feeling, starting to despair a bit. I was feeling really disappointed that this Sabbath rest, completely satisfying rest, was eluding me. About that time, a good friend of ours by the name of Mary Green came by and gave us a book, which I have right here, show you. It's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. He had an entire chapter in this book about Sabbath and his family's celebration of the Sabbath each week. And so having read that and kind of going back and revisiting the sermon that John gave at the very beginning of quarantine, and then just spending time with the Lord and asking Him to help me sort through the frustration I was feeling, I was able to begin to contrast God's Sabbath rest and the Sabbath that I was trying to make of my own effort. God's Sabbath is an invitation for me to remember and celebrate His accomplishments, what He accomplished on the cross for me and for you, what He accomplished in my heart by rescuing me and pulling me from death into life, what He accomplished in my marriage and the redemptive and healing work that He did there. So making that contrast, I started to think about the account of Jesus going to be a guest in Mary and Martha's home, and most of us are familiar with that story, but I did want to read it to you. I'm going to be reading out of Luke chapter 10, verses 38 to 42. It says this: As Jesus and His disciples were on their way, He came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to Him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what He said, but Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to Him and she asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." Again, many of you are familiar with that passage. I certainly resonate with Martha in this story. I'll show you just quickly. I'm going to grab this. This is our children's Bible that we've had for 20 years. It was a gift to us when Hallie was born. I use this a lot because I'm a preschool teacher. Look at this picture of Martha. I love this. Look at the frustration. My kids have seen me make that face a ton. That's me. That's me in quarantine. I think if I were Martha and Jesus was coming to my home as a guest to have dinner with me, I too would be worried and distracted by all the preparation and the trappings of getting ready for that guest. And perhaps I'm doing all of that because I hope at the end of the night, Jesus is gonna turn to me and say, "Nicki, that was the best bread I have ever eaten, and I've had a lot of bread." Or, "Nicki, your home is so inviting. I love this little cozy nook here." That sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but that's the kind of joy and peace and satisfaction that I was toiling for in quarantine. It's fleeting and it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to think that the God of the universe would be a guest in my home and I would settle for these counterfeit comments, the counterfeit joy and peace that might result from these ridiculous comments about meaningless things. When what God has to offer is food that lasts and endures to eternal life. Isn't that so much better? And that's what Mary was enjoying that afternoon. So I hope this has been encouraging to you. I know that I want to be like Mary. I want to find myself at Jesus's feet, accepting the invitation to His banquet feast, His completely satisfying rest that is eternal and lasting and soul deep. Again, thank you so much for listening. I hope I see you this weekend. Have a great day.